Hey, Planeswalkers, Mithras here. Hope you're doing well and staying safe. Today is one of my favorite days, as you know, and we're doing something a little bit new with it as well. We are doing a historic tier list. So yes, that is correct. We are doing a best of 3 historic tier list today for one reason, primarily because we got the good old Kaladesh Remastered being dropped here actually either tomorrow or this week. So pretty exciting. I think it's really important to do these timestamps, get the trends. It helps us do 2 things. One, it helps us understand where the current meta is and where it's going. And then additionally, if you're like me and like to capitalize on the current meta, and also when it's in transition, a lot of times the decks that are the best decks already pre-constructed in the tier list tend to perform well, at least out of the gates, while people are still trying to figure out what's going to work in the new meta. So pretty happy about that today. So what we're going to do is we're going to actually check out the tier list. We're going to talk about some of the key observations within the current meta and the tier list, and then additionally I'm going to go through and do a quick overview of each of the decks for you as well. But before we do so, as always, I just want to say thank you, Planeswalkers. I appreciate your support. Please feel free to subscribe to the channel down over there. Additionally, if you like the video, please like it. You can also like me on Facebook and follow me on Twitter and Twitch. Stay up to date on content like this. And you can check out my Untapped profile to see how my Mythic journey is going each and every day or every month or however you want to track it. So quickly here, Planeswalkers, before we go check out the tier list, one important thing is, for those of you that don't know what a tier list actually is, essentially it's a stack rank of a series of decks, in particular, at least in Magic, that outperform or perform or are kind of below in terms of that collective list. I do a 1, 2, and 3 tier list rank, and then additionally it's kind of a top down, or on the screen that you'll see here as we move across the screen, that kind of gives you the ranking. This is very helpful in gaming in terms of having an understanding of what either a deck or a character is going to outperform given the field. Now, additionally, some things to consider here. This tier list is also rated not only against itself, but also other decks in the meta. It is not a comprehensive tier list in terms of the sense that it is every deck out there. There's about 15 that we're going to cover today, I think are very important for us to be aware of and definitely have a big shape and play within the current meta today. So Planeswalkers, without further ado, we're going to go ahead and unveil the tier list for you today here in Historic. All right, so our best of 3 historic, here's what we got going on. This list is available for you down below in the description, as always, so you have access to it right away. Down there are the deep dives for all the decks that I was able to cover this before I was able to do this one, as well as deck lists for you too. So you have access to all that stuff. So if you do have questions or comments as well, you can comment here, or you can go check out those videos or lists and drop me a line, and I'm always happy to help. So a couple call outs here. I was able to get through about 3/4 of the decks. There are some here that I did not craft or have time to get through, but I will certainly definitely give you an overview. Additionally, I have to some extent played every flavor of these or played against them, so I have a relatively good idea on how they play and so forth. So let's go ahead. We'll talk about the list. Like I said, we'll come back and then we'll check out some observations and key observations, and then additionally we'll do that dive. Now, all of the extended deck lists on top of this, I should mention, are on my site down below too, that you guys can absolutely go check out. All right, so here's what we got going on. We got in tier 1, we have a 4-color control deck. So if you guys check this one out, the big thing about this is traditionally a Sultai mid-range deck. We are splashing for Yasharn here. So keep that in mind. Because it's going to be very important for you. Next, we have a Gruul aggro in T1. Again, for those of you that haven't been through this with me before, I tend to kind of do a bell curve, but obviously the tier 1, we tend to have 1 to 3 mainly in that space. Next, in tier 2, we have Jund Sacrifice, followed by a Sultai midrange, Then we have our lovely UW Auras, which is obviously a dear deck to me, and we can talk about that in a little bit. We have mono red aggro, we have mono red goblins. We also in the tier 2 space have mono green Stompy. We have a Bant control. So this is starting to get back into it here. There's a couple things there that we'll talk about. We have a Rakdos Arcanist deck. This one also is kind of near and dear to my heart. Finalizing that tier 2. Then into tier 3, we start with our mono red burn. We have a newcomer, Dimir Rogues, and another newcomer here, Neostorm, making quite the splash, to be fair. And then additionally, we have Azor's Control. And then finally rounding out our tier 3, we have a no color monument deck. So very interesting, lots of cool things here that we can check out and play. But I do want to just talk a little bit about some key observations. But before we do so, one of the reasons why I did want to cover this and talk about a few things here quickly is that one, there's always some crossover decks. So like the Dimir Rogues deck that we saw down below there, below me right now. That is kind of a crossover deck right now. So I think it's pretty sweet that you can play standard, find something nice, and literally the craft there was primarily just a couple of uncommons, which was great. Usually the more expensive stuff can be the lands, but you can make do with those. And we'll talk about some of the other key components here in the observations in a minute. So like yourselves, I started out heavily playing standard. I actually, in real life, in Paper Magic, I actually went to my first tournament. I think I mentioned this a few times, playing Modern. And so, trying to collect the cards and those things, over time, it does become easier to get into Historic. I do feel like as a competitive player, Wizards and Arena does force you at one point or another to get into Historic, and that was part of my story. I started playing Historic more, not because I necessarily wanted to focus on the format, but because I was forced to, in terms of some of the competitive play with the Arena Opens as well as the MQs and those things. So I think it's always a good, important place to kind of keep an eye on, especially as a competitive player. And then again, for those of you that do like fun, it's a great way to play unique decks and a lot of interesting things, and clearly Neostorm's one of those. So anyway, quickly here, let's talk about some of the observations. I think these are really key and important for us when we do talk about trends. I'm really trying to work on this because I think it's important for us as players to make us better, to know a lot of the styles, the mechanics, things as they move across the time spectrum for us in terms of new sets that get dropped, bannings, and those kinds of things. They really tend to have an impact. And then obviously the longer you're here, and Magic's been around for 25 plus years, the more knowledge that you gain over time, it helps us as players, and it helps us read meta. It helps us figure out what we want to play and those kinds of things. So enough there. A couple of the key considerations. So we have Yasharn here. I did want to make that call out because I felt it was pretty important. So one, Yasharn's impact from Zendikar's Rising has really helped in this mid-range control variant, primarily pre-Zendikar Rising based off what I had been used to in the format, and this was also very prevalent when Sultai was very big as well. But Jund Sack, and same with Sack in general, Jund Sack and Sultai mid-range were kind of the two key components. I'd say Rakdos Sack and Jund Sack kind of still leading the pack. But with Yasharn here, for many of those of you that may not be familiar, you should definitely check out the video that I did for this one. But I do want to talk about this for a second. So Yasharn, obviously when it enters the battlefield, it has some deck thinning where we go grab a forest and a plains. But the key thing is players can't pay life or sacrifice non-land permanents to cast spells or activate abilities. So that really shuts down a lot of things. Jund Citadel was a big piece. Previously, the sack stuff here is a little bit different, but it definitely turned off a lot of that meta and the percentage of that meta. And recently, and why I did give it the T1 spot here, along with Gruul Aggro, has performed really, really well in the recent tournaments. To note, Red Bull 2020, where there was only like 16 players invited, all top players, and the majority of that field was cramped with 4-color control and I'll say Sultai mid-range. So pretty important there. And a key consideration, it is interesting to see that it hadn't made as big of an impact in Standard, but makes sense because the prevalence of sacrifice has actually fallen off quite a bit. Next, we got Rise of what I call the 3-colored or multicolored. So a lot of the decks that we see here towards the top are 3-colored. It's not as prevalent in terms of domination between the 2-colored, even though we do have Gruul Aggro there and UW Auras towards the top, or the monocolored stuff. A few key parts of that is the modal lands, which we always talk about. The land smoothing has helped a ton, and not getting flooded with a lot of the new, as you guys know me, I like to joke, the pain lands, they're not pain lands per se, but they are, but you can pay 3, bring them in untapped, or you can cast them, kind of a thing. It's really helped a ton. The other thing that we'll notice as well is there's been just a general shift from early to late game. So a lot of the stuff had been dominated at certain times, more so early to mid-range. When Goblins first came around the scene, it was heavily played. It was very quick, and now there's been access again with a lot of the color schemas and the modal lands, easier access to kind of smooth out and have options in the early game, making again those decks stronger and getting to late game a little bit easier for those decks. And to kind of put that all in a wrapper, Zendikar Rising actually did put a pretty nice punch into Historic by bringing a couple of those key components, again, Yasharn and some of the modal lands. Next, I do want to touch on Jumpstart because I haven't done one of these trend things on Historic specifically yet. We've kind of missed some of the bannings. It's hard to stay on top of both. And for a lot of you guys that do sub to the channel, I obviously really appreciate it. So for those of you new, please feel free to sub down over there. But I'm trying not to flood you guys with 2 or 3 a days kind of content. You guys know that I traditionally kind of just pump out one daily standard if I can. And then what I've been trying to do, at least to get this together, was posting at a different time during the day and making sure that you guys weren't getting a notification. But I absolutely encourage you guys to check this stuff out. And I do appreciate many of you who have asked a lot of great questions and some of these crossover things. I really am here to help support and help everyone, and it helps me get better too. So again, back to the Jumpstart piece here. So Jumpstart made a really nice impact. We saw things like Thoughtseize come around. We got a lot of nice staples, but the real one that I wanted to talk about was the Neostorm impact. I do remember seeing a couple players creating the infinite combo there kind of on Reddit before it came out. And it's kind of neat to see that it's worked out in the sense that Neostorm's obviously still around. It can be interrupted, but still a great deck nonetheless at T3 there. And obviously that I always say is whether it's a 1, 2, or 3 kind of tier deck, you absolutely can definitely get to Mythic. The more effort you put into that deck, the more experience you get with that deck, you definitely bring your own personal win percentage up. I would say even sometimes despite what the meta may be throwing at you. So those are a couple of pieces I think that are important. Jumpstart obviously had an impact. I wanted to call those ones out because Thoughtseize is just a huge staple in general. Neostorm's one of the cool things that I had seen and other players seen, but obviously there are a lot more impactful cards on the Jumpstart side too, worth mentioning. Now we have one other piece, the Burning Tree Emissary, so BTE. This card coming back has been an absolute blast. I'm so glad that they did it. I also feel that the meta is a little bit more balanced at the moment, which is why they're able to do it. Jokingly, one of the things that I've enjoyed is I call it the Royal Flush Hand. I did drop 4 BTEs in one match, and I really wish I would have recorded it. Unfortunately, I wasn't doing this at the time. I should have took a screenshot or something, but before I got to it, it already gave me the win con. So pretty nice to drop 4 and then have an Embercleave next turn. Now it was pretty amazing to kind of do that. But anyway, enough about that. You can absolutely do it because I've done it. But it's cool to see that BT is back, whether you like it or not. Again, it's nice to see that Wizards does take a lot of these things on the banned and restricted into consideration. We'll move things around to kind of impact meta depending on what's happening. So those are a lot of the key observations. A few things that I just wanted to point out for you that I think are important that you'll continue to build over time within your own personal journey and your Magic journey as well, that are just things to kind of keep in your back pocket, especially again when you think about like Neostorm and stuff. I love kind of I don't want to say jank brew because it's not really a jank brew, but it's actually a nice combo that has stuck around, and you'll remember those things and you'll think about how to build decks and craft, and that's obviously something that you can use. So Planeswalkers, with that said, as always, I just want to say thank you. Again, I really appreciate your support. Please feel free to subscribe to the channel down over there. Additionally, you can like the video if you enjoy it. You can like me on Facebook and follow me on Twitter and Twitch to stay up to date on content like this. With that said, Planeswalkers, we did talk about what a tier list is. We talked about some of the observations. We talked about the tier list. At this point, I'm going to transition into speaking at a high level about each of these decks. But don't forget, again, deck lists are available for you down below. Links available to those decks down below. You guys can check out my website. It's got all this content right there for you. A little bit more story on the observations and things, but obviously I like to kind of present the content as well for you. And then again, if you got questions or comments, please let me know. So with that said, let's go ahead and pop into it here. We're going to go ahead and take a look at our T1 first deck here off the bat, our 4-colored Yasharn deck, really the 4-color mid-range. But I'll just kind of highlight these quickly here for you. Again, you can absolutely talk about some of the deep dives or watch some of the deep dives to see what's going on. But the main piece around this deck and consideration is really, again, to control the early game, get to the mid-range game. You got a lot of things that you can use to finish off your opponents or control them or shut them down. And I really, really enjoyed playing this deck. It ran really, really smoothly. You would think that based off of 4 colors, it'd be slightly tricky, but you got enough support here with the land. And here's the sideboard as well. Lots of great options to shut down things early or late game and pivot around for what you need. All right, let's go back to the next one. The next tier 1 deck is we have a Gruul aggro deck. Gruul, again, continues to be very, very solid. Embercleave, Questing Beast, the Collected Company. So again, this was really, really strong coming out of Amonkhet Remastered. So that was actually something that I didn't mention that I probably should have mentioned as well in terms of some of the observations and things to keep in mind. We got a lot of good things there. But again, you get some early ramp, you get some builds, you get a lot of action here, lots of options. People forget how useful Galia is here, really to cycle through your deck and get some options. Additionally, getting the Khazad-dû Mammoth. So lots of good ability to quickly pack a punch and have some survivability on top of it. But the whole goal here is really going after that T4 win con to really, really lock in that game. And then additionally, we got great sideboard cards here to have lots of good answers. Guruk's Harbinger is awesome. Super invaluable against more of the black splash control side of things there too. Next, we got Jund Sak. So this one I've played quite a bit. There's actually here, this version just had 2 lands and hadn't used. But this deck works really, really great. It's efficient. We got the Cauldron Familiar, which is Oven going again. We got our Dreadhorde Butcher. Very effective. Once you get a Mayhem Devil on the board, it's pretty much you're locked in if you have some sack engines. Very, very solid. We got a Corvold still around for some of that finishing move in the draw, which is really important. But again, overall, a great deck. I've played a Jund Citadel version as well. That's pretty interesting. Here's the sideboard. We got a lot, again, as always, you guys, you like to hear me. We got a lot of answers, lots of things we can do here against our opponents. So next we have a tier 2 Sultai midrange. So again, as I mentioned before, we pretty much have everything in this deck minus these lands, and there's nothing wrong ever with crafting those lands. Again, I just ran out of time, but here in specifics, again, we have a little bit more strength here because we dropped the Yasharns in terms of board control. Additionally, we're playing Tameo, Collector of Tales, over the other one, but that focus really heavily again is on that early game ramp, the controlling the board, and then using our big creatures or Nissa to kind of finally close things out, or that good old Shark Typhoon. Sideboard's pretty similar. Lots of great answers depending on what you're playing there, or how you need to play, whether it's early, mid-range, or late game. Next in T2, we got one of my favorite UW Auras. So I started off my Arena historic journey, an Arena Open with Mono White, I think, Auras. I performed well, cut over to Mono Blue to get access to a few other things. This deck continues to do very well and perform well. Has a great win rate. So here we go. Very, very fast and efficient. Really plays well. You can aggressively mulligan for Core Spirit Dancer and do a lot of things very, very effectively. Within our sideboard, we got good control or options in terms of what we're going to play here. Again, very effective, and you can absolutely go check out that deep dive video that I pulled together. Next, we have Mono Red Aggro. So this one in particular was #1 deck this month. Very, very effective, very fast. Mono Red is just such a, I don't want to say cleave engine, but a efficient linear killer. And it always does really well, whether it's best of 1 or best of 3. You really got to be on your game. The biggest thing about Mono Red is you still get some access to some decent things here for your sideboard. You just tend to be more opened up, in my opinion, to the sideboard of your opponents, depending on what you're playing. Particularly if it's kind of late game decks, that's where you're going to be a little bit more exposed because they can get the multiples for their 1 card kind of a deal. Great deck nonetheless. Now we got good old Mono Red Goblin. So this deck was also a #1 deck for this season. One of the cool things in introductions here was Ironcrag Feat. So the ability to play around and not getting, I'll say, mana screwed or hurt, and still get access to Muxus has been a pretty interesting play. Still extremely efficient, still very, very lethal. Great deck to play. Great access on the sideboard here on a lot of things that you can do. Again, just like Mono Red, this thing is a very, very efficient linear killer. Next, we have Mono Green Stompy. So this version of the deck was a little bit older one that I've used. It's still awesome. It's very efficient. Some of the things that I like about it is it still gets to the point. A lot of people forget that Mono Green runs really well. I've had a lot of success with it. You could update the lands a little bit. You could also put in the modal lands. I just wanted to get you something that's still very viable here and playable, so you can get moving with it. Again, I've had a lot of success with this version. Absolutely happy to get you an updated one if you're really looking at playing this a little bit more. I just didn't get as much time to playing as I mentioned. Next, we got Ban Control. So Ban Control is pretty interesting here. So this particular deck doesn't access it doesn't access Collected Company, but we don't need to because we're not really running a lot of creatures. So I've seen the Bant Coco before, so that's something to consider, but obviously this is a control deck. So here we got a lot of great options. I think we get a lot of access. The big thing with going the green here is two things. You get the Euro and you get your Sharn. So again, you still continue to get that impact. Lots of really good things that we can play, and you get access to a lot of the awesome board wipes like the Wraths here, which are very important. We got great responses no matter what you're playing against. Heliod's Intervention's just a blowout card against the enchantment decks. So, all right, on to our next one. So our next T2 is a Rakdos Arcanus. So this was actually Luis Savato's deck. Really enjoyed playing this. I played this, I believe, for the Arena Open. You guys can check it out. Definitely pushed me in terms of this might have been the MQ. Definitely pushed me in terms of something unique. I saw it rise well. Louis did a great job. I thought I'd give it a shot. I did not play it as well as Louis, obviously, but I really enjoy this deck. It's still hyper competitive and does a really nice job, and really tough to stop if you get moving. And a lot of good access again here in the sideboard. Lots of things that we can leverage to be successful. Next, into our Tier 3, my friends. So first off in Tier 3, we got Mono Red Burn. This is a little bit more, I'm going to say, older version, but a interesting version that I enjoy still. So I thought it was relevant for you too. Here we really look to capitalize on that direct damage. It's a little bit more creature heavy than some of the other burn decks, but that can really save you relative to some of the other current burn things that are out there. But we do have that ability to really mix things up there with our sideboard relative to what we need. So this is always a good start, and then you can transition more into a burn heavy piece. I gave it Tier 3 because it can run out of juice, and if you aren't able to consistently burn your opponent down, or they get some draw going ahead of you, hence why the Experimental Frenzy in here, it can be rather challenging. Or if you run into a life gain deck, that's one of the reasons why you have good old Rampaging Ferocidon in here. You can run into some problems. So anyway, next we have good old Dimir Rogue. So as I mentioned, this is one of the crossover decks. One of the things that you will definitely craft is Curious Obsession. The other one will be Una's Blackguard. This card is awesome. Gives your creature a +1/+1 when they deal damage that your opponent discards a card. So it's very crazy how quickly you can lock someone out if they don't have answers to these things, which is awesome, and it's a ton of fun. And if you do like rogues, or if you hate rogues currently in Standard, it's a good crossover deck nonetheless for Historic here. And then lastly, again, here is our sideboard. We got a lot of answers to both early game and some late game, mid game options there too. So next we have Neostorm. So I do want to spend a minute here because we have talked quite a bit about it. So the whole key here, just because I don't have a deep dive deck tech video for you, I do want to spend a minute here. So the way it works is you get all your stuff out there, creatures out there. I actually really like Paradise Druid in this particular format. If you can line up a Seagate Stormcaller, what you do is you pop this in, you pop a Neoform, and what Neoform does, and why this is called Storm, is Storm used to be a mechanic, or was considered a mechanic for the copy. So that is why it's called Neostorm and not Neoform. So just nice on the nomenclature. I did pull a whole thing up on it, and that's my quick and short version of it. I can't remember which block that was from, but it was an older block. That's why it's called Storm. Anyway, and so what this does is, as an additional cost, cast a spell, you sacrifice a creature, search your library for a creature card with the converted mana cost equal to 1+, sacrifice creature's mana cost, put that card on the battlefield with a additional +1/+1 counter on it, and then shuffle your library. So you sack a 2-drop, and then you pull any of these, and then you drop your Neoform. And then what you're doing is you're pulling the dual casters. You keep hitting the dual casters, then you hit the Glasspool Mimic, and then create a dual cast. And then you pull 1 Tuck Rubble Fort. So this gives your creatures haste. And then you, with your last one, your last copy there, you pull the Combat Celebrant. So everything's going to have haste. You can swing in, and then you exert this guy, and then you hit again, and it's game over. And honestly, I have, if you don't interrupt that combo, they have enough usually to get you on the first swing too. So I've not been able to necessarily hold off on that first swing. Then again, we got a lot of counter spells here. A big one with Pact Negation. I think you guys have seen this in a few different spots. But the reality is you can target at 0 cost, but you got to pay 5 next turn. Otherwise, you lose the game. Great trade-off. So lots of great options there, my friends. Let's go ahead. I know that was a little bit longer on this particular deck. We got 2 more left, so just bear with me. So first we got Azorius Control. So here, this deck, we got a lot of great options, really focused again on your traditional control. We got cycling in here as a portion of it, and very, very effective. We have our Ras. Late game is really leveraging Gideon here, and leveraging your Teferi, where you just exile everything that they have essentially. We do have options with lovely Blast Zone to help wipe things off the board, but you could absolutely add in Zendikar Rising's Crawling Barrens too. So a lot of people forget about that one. This particular deck doesn't have it, but you could also throw that in there. That's why it's good to also be familiar with your standard decks. And then a lot of other great things here in terms of control and the ability to swap things in. You could finalize here with Amiria's Call too, with 2 flyers. So a lot of good options for you. Lastly, we have no color monument here at T3. So let's see what we got going on here. So for those of you that aren't familiar, this is really about getting to Ulamog or Ugin relatively quickly. We have a ton of ramp options to get there, and draw options. And it's about moving quickly. We got life gain with Radiant Fountain. Generally what happens is that if you are not getting the life gain, and you're not getting the draws that you need, it can be too slow. And definitely against some of the late game decks, it can get interrupted pretty easily because players know what's coming. The big one here though is this still triggers when you cast the spell. You still get to exile 2 target permanents, but at least if they get it off the board, they don't have to worry about exiling 20 cards off their library. So I remember the good old Zendikar days when Ulamog was out playing in person, but we'll see. Hopefully they'll be back soon. Anyway, Planeswalkers, awesome deck, super fun, super interesting, creative. I really like this one too. Wish I could have done a deep dive. I still might, but we'll see what happens. So finally, again, this is the tier list for you. I really hope you enjoyed it. I wish everyone the best of luck with the release of Kaladesh Remastered. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. I think we're going to get a nice impact here on the meta potentially. There's definitely some things that I think I'm not going to speculate too much here, but I've definitely seen a few of the older top 8 decks and how they could fit into the current formats. So I think we'll definitely get some new renditions of some of these decks. However, I do feel like some of these decks will still tend to be pretty powerful. So we'll see. I'm looking forward to it. If anything, you'll at least have a good out of the gate here with these ones in terms of maybe moving up the ladder quickly, or if you're here to have fun, playing some unique fun decks. So Planeswalkers, with that said, as always, I just want to say thank you again. I really appreciate your support. Please feel free to subscribe to the channel down over there. Additionally, like the video if you like it. You can like me on Facebook and follow me on Twitter and Twitch to stay up to date on content like this. Finally, again, questions, comments down below, tier lists down below, video links down below, deck lists down below. You can check out my website also to get access to all the deck lists. If you like the copy and paste stuff versus maybe some of the links. And then lastly, you can always check out my Untapped profile. A lot of these decks are on there too. and you can keep tabs on me. But Planeswalkers, truly, again, I enjoy doing this stuff. I wish I could have got through more of these decks, but time is a problem, as always. But I still love doing this, and I wanted to get this stuff out. And lastly, I hope you enjoyed, if you're new, what a tier list is, how it can help you, why I do these, essentially, for you. You saw the tier list, and you also got to hear some of my observations and some of my trends analysis, and then obviously dives into the high-level dives in each of the decks. Planeswalkers, stay tuned. Ton more stuff coming your way, as always. Looking forward to Kaladesh, like many of you. I think it's going to be fun. Looking forward to doing a updated tier list when we get a chance. We'll continue to crank out on some of the standard stuff. Again, this is a best of 3 one. I may try to get through a best of one real quickly here and turn that around. So stay tuned as well, just so that you have it, because I know many of you like to play best one. It may probably come out the same day Kaladesh does, so you may be distracted. But anyway, we'll see you again soon. Planeswalkers, you stay safe. Looking forward to seeing you. You take care. Mithras out, and more content coming your way.